The Gospel of Luke, chapter 8. The Gospel of Luke, chapter 8. If you've been following along with our series here in the Gospel of Luke, we've made our way now to one of the most remarkable miracles that Jesus performed in his earthly ministry, and that is his encounter with a man who was a maniac. He was a demoniac. And the reason that this man's behavior was so outlandish is because he was filled with demonic forces that caused him to behave in a way that was outside the bounds even of human decency. And a lot of times we think about demon possession, demonic influences, and honestly, most of us, if someone said to us, "You are being controlled by the devil," we would take very, very strong offense to a statement like that. But isn't it interesting that Jesus looked at Simon Peter, who was one of his apostles, and spoke to him and said, "Get thee behind me, Satan." Not necessarily speaking to Peter, but speaking to a spirit that was influencing Peter to say something which was untrue and unscriptural. Today, I want to look at this passage and understand something about the maniac who was made whole. There's times when you and I are not sure whether God's power is sufficient to change a person, because of how far they've gone into sin, how much their life has been affected by the consequences of sin. We may question, we may ask, could God ever change a person like that? And the encounter that we'll look at today between Jesus and this man who was out of his mind because of demonic influences will demonstrate to us that the power of Jesus is sufficient. In fact, the very reason that it's included in the gospel record is for us to understand that Jesus has tremendous power over even the most powerful demonic influences that exist in the world today. Now, before we read the text, which will begin in verse 26 and continue down to verse 40, it's important for you to understand that the country of the Gadarenes, it's also called the country of the Gergesenes in some of the other Gospels, was a place that was inhabited by a pagan people. It was a part of Decapolis. It was there close to those 10 cities, and that area was especially marked by a spirit of paganism and idolatry. The people who lived in this region refused the ways of the Lord. They refused the Old Testament scriptures. They followed after false gods. They worshiped idols. And they were particularly taken with Greek philosophies. And one thing that was noted about the Gadarenes, which becomes significant in the text today, is that they were particularly noted for offering pig sacrifices to their false gods. So keep that in your mind as we read the text beginning in verse 26. Luke chapter 8, verse 26. And they arrived at the country of the Gadarenes, which is over against Galilee. And when he went forth to land, there met him out of the city a certain man which had devils long time, and wear no clothes, neither abode in any house, but in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell down before him, and with a loud voice said, "What have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of God Most High? I beseech thee, torment me not." For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. For oftentimes it had caught him, and he was kept bound with chains and in fetters, and he brake the bands and was driven of the devil into the wilderness. And Jesus asked him, saying, "What is thy name?" And he said, "Legion," because many devils were entered into him. And they besought him that he would not command them to go out into the deep. And there was there an herd of many swine feeding on the mountain, and they besought him that he would suffer them to enter into them, and he suffered them. Then went the devils out of the man and entered into the swine, and the herd ran violently down a steep place into the lake and were choked. When they that fed them saw what was done, they fled and went and told it in the city and in the country. Then they went out to see what was done and came to Jesus and found the man out of whom the devils were departed, sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. They also which saw it told them by what means he that was possessed of the devils was healed. Then the whole multitude of the country of the Gadarenes round about besought him to depart from them, for they were taken with great fear. And he went up into the ship and returned back again. Now, the man out of whom the devils were departed besought him that he might be with him. But Jesus sent him away, saying, Return to thine own house, and show how great things God hath done unto thee. And he went his way and published throughout the whole city how great things Jesus had done unto him. And it came to pass that when Jesus was returned, the people gladly received him, for they were all waiting for him. There's a couple things that are brought vividly to our attention in this account about a man who was in a desperate position. Clearly, in this account, the Lord wants us to see something about the destructive nature of Satan's influence in this world and in people's lives. He's highlighting for us the really obnoxious nature of the enemy and what he wants to do in people's lives. And certainly most people don't get to the place where this man was living, but this is brought to our attention as a vivid example of the power of Satan and what Satan wants to do, how he wants to work in people's lives. The other thing that is clearly brought to our attention and is really highlighted in this passage is the puzzling truth that the people in the area of the Gadarenes were more afraid of the power of Jesus than they were of the power of demons. They were so afraid of Jesus that they wanted Jesus to leave, but they were quite happy to have demons living among them. The third thing that is the most important in this passage is a highlight for us of the power of Jesus. Jesus has the ability to deliver. Jesus has the ability to set men free, even from very serious spiritual oppression and demonic possession. Notice in our text, if you would, that the destruction of the devil is startling. And we see this man who is displayed for us, and the Lord tells us something about the details of his life. Not every encounter that Jesus has with an individual tells us a lot about that person, but in this case, we get a lot of details about this man's condition so that we can understand how serious this situation was. The Bible tells us that when Jesus got off the ship, after going across the Sea of Galilee, after the storm that he calmed, they arrived at the other side, and when they got off the ship, they were in the country of the Gadarenes. And almost immediately after getting off the ship, a man met them. And this man who was speaking to Jesus was almost certainly being used as a mouthpiece for the demonic creatures that lived inside of him. And Jesus was confronted with this outlandish behavior with this man who wasn't wearing any clothes, this man who had chains hanging off of him, which were being used to try to control his behavior, this man who was obviously speaking in a way which was outside of his mind, outside of his autonomous authority. And the Bible tells us about this man that he had had these demons for a long time, according to verse 27. And there's more than one that inhabited this man. But as I was thinking about what it must have been like for him to be under the control of these demonic forces for, as the text says, a long time, I thought about how often people have sins. We sometimes refer to them as vices in their life that have been present in their life for a long, long time. They can't even imagine being set free from those things or not participating in those sins anymore because they're such a part of their life, such a part of their existence that they almost identify their daily routine, their daily pattern with pursuing after these sins. And certainly this man must have loathed the presence of these demons, but there was also a sense in which they had been with him so long that he didn't even know what life would be like without them. You know, I've talked with people who, as much as they would like to be set free from sin in their life, they can scarcely imagine what it would be like to live without that sin present in their life. Because it's such a part of who they are and their daily existence, and it's so difficult for them to imagine. That is the work of the devil. This man had been brought to a place where his life was filled with shame. Because of the demonic presence that was in his life, this man ran around, and the Bible tells us that he wear no clothes. Everywhere in the Bible that you look, the absence of clothes is equated with shame. You study it for yourself, and you'll find it to be true. And just because modern culture tells us there's nothing to be ashamed of, take all your clothes off, doesn't make it any different. This man was controlled by demons, and he acted in an outlandish manner that was offensive to everyone else in society. They couldn't keep any clothes on the man. He ran all over the place, and you say, well, why is the Bible telling us that? It's because this man was brought to a place of shame. How many people are living their lives in a spirit of absolute despondency and shame because of things that they have done and continue to do, and they see absolutely no escape from that behavior? Now, the devil doesn't get access to someone's life by saying, I want to make you a shameful person. I want to bring all kinds of shame and sorrow into your life. Why don't you let me in? Oh no, he makes promises that sound much different than that. The way he approaches sounds more like, I'll make you happy. I'll make you satisfied. Oh, listen, you're just not enjoying life. I'll give you the enjoyment that you're looking for if you just let me in. But he's got something, a trick up his sleeve. He's looking to take advantage. He's subtle, deceitful. This man certainly couldn't have imagined before all of this his life filled with such shame. But many people's existence is marked by shame because the accuser brings shame into people's lives. This man was uncontrollable. He was uncivilized, and he was evidently fascinated by death. The Bible tells us that he ran around in the tombs, and his behavior was outlandish. He was wild and crazy. In fact, he was so out of bounds of polite society that if you watched the way that he behaved, you would judge him to be acting more like a wild animal than a human being. Have you ever seen someone like this? Just out walking in society, and you see someone who is out of their mind? I'm not suggesting that every person that's out of their mind is demon-possessed, but I am suggesting that there's a lot more demon possession than we give credit for. There's a lot more of the devil's influence in the world than we really believe. Jesus was encountering a man who was brought to a place where I suppose when it started, it was funny. I suppose when it started, it wasn't that big of a deal, but it had become such a problem in that area that this man was completely uncontrollable. And in fact, we see that in an attempt to control him, the people in the society would bind him with chains and fetters. We find in a parallel passage that the power of the demons was so strong that this man could pluck those fetters and chains apart. It didn't do any good. And this man was so uncontrollable that nobody really wanted him in town. So he went out to the place where the dead bodies were. And it was the demons inside of this man that caused him, when he met Jesus in verse 28, to cry out with a loud voice and say, "What have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of God Most High? I beseech thee, torment me not." Now let me ask you a question. Did Jesus come to torment this man? No, he came to set him free. But doesn't the accuser tell people, Jesus is going to torment you? If you follow Jesus, he's going to make you sad. He's going to make you miserable. He's going to take away all your fun. He's not going to let you live the life that you want to live. Don't follow Jesus. That's the worst thing you could do. These demons had this man so deceived that he thought that Jesus had come to torment him. And the demons understood that Jesus had the power to cast them out and to set this man free. They didn't want Jesus coming anywhere near this man because they wanted to continue having control over him. It's amazing to me what happens sometimes when you're preaching the gospel to someone, and some of the most outlandish things will happen. Some of the most bizarre circumstances that could not possibly be described as circumstantial, but could only be attributed to some kind of a spiritual force which was being put out there to cause a distraction to keep people from hearing the gospel message. I've experienced it many, many, many times. These demonic creatures did not want this man to be set free. And incidentally, Satan doesn't want you to be set free. Satan doesn't want you to follow Jesus. He'll tell you all sorts of lies about Jesus. He'll do anything in his power to keep you from listening to the claims of Jesus or seeking after the Lord with your whole heart, because he knows if you follow Jesus, he will lose control over you. Yes, sir. Right. This man was isolated. The Bible said that the evil spirit, the devil, would drive him into the wilderness, according to verse 29. And the people didn't really want him around anyway, but he would be driven out into the wilderness, and he would be out there alone, isolated, without the input of other people in his life. And this was an unhealthy isolation. It was causing him to dive deeper and deeper and deeper into the hole of his own problems. This is a bit of an aside, but it's amazing how modern culture has provided an avenue for people to be isolated even in the most public areas. And that isolation is unhealthy. That isolation tends to promote wrong thinking. That isolation causes people to pursue after things in the secrecy of their existence that they would not do in the company of other people. And it promotes more and more of the power of Satan in people's lives. There's a powerful principle there and something to be paying attention to. But we understand that this isolation is very real. The demon that Jesus spoke to in verse 30, and you notice that when Jesus addressed this man, he addressed the demon that was speaking through the man. I don't recommend you try that, by the way. You're not Jesus. But Jesus did this. He spoke to this demon and he said, "What is thy name?" And the name that was offered, that came out of the lips of that man, is Legion. The word legion means a great army. This was a multitude of demons that was inside of this man. We have no idea how many demons were inhabiting this poor man. And you understand that what happens in a person's life, and we're describing the destruction of the devil, but what happens in a person's life is that when one demon becomes comfortable, that demon invites other demons to come in too. Satan is never content with just a little piece of your life. Now, that's all he asks for initially. That's all that he says he wants. But the problem is that after you give him that little piece, I liken it sometimes to him asking if he can have the broom closet. Can I have the broom closet? And you give it to him. And he says, I'll stay in here, I'll be polite, I'll be nice. He never does. He never does. He's gonna start pushing on the door. Pretty soon, he's gonna take up habitation in another part. He's gonna start flexing his muscle and spreading into some other areas. You say, why does that happen? That happens because of the purpose of Satan. And Jesus tells us in John chapter 10 and verse 10, the thief cometh not, but for to steal and to kill and to destroy. People say, why is there so much evil in the world? Why is there so much wickedness that goes on? Why do people behave the way that they behave? Why is there so much cruelty and anger and hurt in the world? That is the work of Satan in people's lives. He's come to steal and kill and to destroy. I think you could agree with me this morning that what Satan was doing in this man's life was awful. It was horrible. None of us should be comfortable with this sort of a thing in someone's life. Not in our life, not in our loved ones' lives. We should not be thinking, I hope that Satan can just have a little piece of this person's life or of my life. That's going to end in destruction. Right. And I think so often as Christians, we underestimate the damage that the devil brings into a person's life. We're somewhat comfortable with certain levels of satanic involvement in our life and in the lives of our loved ones. It's passable, it's okay, it's not that big of a deal, and we underestimate how much damage comes from that. But we understand as well, it doesn't have to be that way. It does not have to be that way. So, while it's important that we understand the power of Satan, and it's highlighted in this passage for us to realize, recognize, understand Satan has power to destroy, what is more important, more significant is that the power of Jesus is greater. Amen. And in preaching a message like this, it's not my intention for people to start looking for the devil behind every bush, to start reading into every encounter with another person as some sort of a demonic encounter or the demon in someone else. Be careful about that sort of thing. Be careful about giving credit to Satan for things which are really just a person's own self-deception. I think so often it's possible for us to say, the devil made me do it, the devil tempted me, and it's really just yourself. It's really just you yearning for the thing that you want, that you think is going to make you happy. And certainly there's an enemy who is trying to deceive. So I don't want you to give too much credit to the devil, but I don't want you in this scientific age of knowledge and wisdom and understanding to think we've got it figured out and there is no such thing anymore as a devil. He certainly exists. He certainly is working in people's lives, and we certainly do encounter his temptations and his designs in our own lives as well as in the lives of others. And if you give him space, if you yield to him, he will destroy your life. Amen. He will. Right. Let me ask you this. Would you invite a serial killer to move into your home and live with you? They're a nice person. I like them. I'm comfortable with them being around my children, my spouse. I think it would be good. No, you wouldn't do that. But you understand that every serial killer was inspired by this demonic force. Don't invite him into your life. You say, how do you invite him into your life? I hate to say it, but a lot of people invite him into their life through their entertainment choices. Through the choices of what they allow to come into their mind as knowledge and wisdom. They invite the presence of Satan by their choices to rebel against the law of God. Be careful what you invite into your life. You think you can control it. Most of the time, we fool ourselves and think, well, I can keep it under control. I know what I'm doing. I'm smart. You are stupid. And the devil is way, way smarter than you are. But he's happy for you to think he's a dummy and you're smart. All the while, he's got you right where he wants you. So be careful about the destruction of the devil. It's startling what the devil is able to do in our lives if we allow him. The second truth that I told you is really highlighted in this passage is that unbelievably, the people here in the Gadarenes are more afraid of Jesus' power than they are of the power of Satan. The Bible says, look at what it says in verse 37, the whole multitude of the country of the Gadarenes round about besought Jesus to depart from them, for they were taken with great fear. They came to Jesus, they were afraid, they begged him. They said, Jesus, get out of here. We do not want you around. This is upsetting the apple cart. This is bothering our lives. We don't like what's happening here. Get away from us. Now, you would think they would have asked Jesus to stay. You would think they would want Jesus to stay and deliver more people who were bound by Satan and demonic powers. But the truth is that they seem to be more afraid of Jesus than they were of the demons that Jesus cast out of this man. And it was obvious when they came to Jesus that he had done a great work. Verse 33, after these devils went out of the man, and they entered into the swine, the herd ran violently down a steep place into the lake, and the swine were choked. And in verse 35, they went out to see what was done, and they came to Jesus, and they found the man, out of whom the devils were departed, sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. They saw what Jesus had done. This man was completely changed. Everyone knew that something had happened in this man's life. They couldn't remember the last time they saw him with clothes on, in his right mind, sitting calmly, listening to Jesus as he was instructing and teaching. But the response was not one of anticipation and excitement about the power of Jesus. Look what Jesus can do. The response was, we are terrified of you, Jesus. We don't want you around. Now, why? Well, because again, these people were not that comfortable with the outlandish behavior of this man who is controlled by a legion of demons, but they themselves were in the grip of these demonic forces and were deceived about the purposes of Jesus. And what I observe, what I see today is that many people are terrified of Jesus exercising any authority in their life. They would much rather deal with the destructive consequences of the devil's presence in their life. And the reason is because at least I get to do what I want to do. At least I get to have fun. At least I get to pursue the path I want to live on. At least I get to enjoy the things that I want to enjoy. If I follow Jesus, he's going to take away everything that I enjoy. Well, I don't want to argue with you, but I do want to point out to you that he won't necessarily just take away the things that you enjoy. He will change the things that you enjoy. And you'll start to find out that there are things that are far more enjoyable than the things that are calling to you that you think are going to satisfy you, which never will. They never will fill you up. That's just deception of the enemy. But so many people are terrified of Jesus having any part of their life. Or we could say, I think most people are comfortable with Jesus having a small part of their life. I'm comfortable with being a professing Christian, with going to church once in a while, with calling myself a follower of Christ. But I really don't want to hear anything about Jesus or consider anything about Jesus except when I go to church on Sunday. And oh, by the way, when I get there, it better make me feel good. And if I don't feel good, I'm finding somewhere else to go where I'll feel better about myself. What is that? That's just like, I don't want Jesus' authority in my life. I don't want the truth of the Scripture preached. That's what people are terrified of that. They're terrified of Jesus' authority. Most of us who are here this morning can see the foolishness of the people in the Gadarenes. And we sit in disbelief at their arrogance in telling Jesus to leave, but we ourselves are telling Jesus he is not allowed to exercise his authority in my life. No, I'm not going to do what you say, Lord. By the way, that doesn't even make sense. The irony of saying, no, Lord. Think about that. These people didn't want Jesus around. They were afraid of the power of Jesus. And I realize that oftentimes people will find that strange and they'll say, who would be afraid of the power of Jesus? People who have seen the power of Jesus. A lot of what is called Jesus in this age is not Jesus. It's a form of godliness that denies the power thereof. It's devoid of the presence of God, doesn't have his power. But if you see the power of Jesus, it is something to be afraid of. It is something to cause you to marvel. Remember, the disciples just before this happened had seen Jesus calm the wind and the waves, and their response was, what manner of man is this? He has incredible power. And that leads us to the last thought this morning that's really the highlight of the whole passage, and it's this, that Jesus was demonstrating his authority, his power over devils. You have no reason to fear the power of Satan when the power of Jesus is at work in your life. The power of Jesus is far greater than the power of Satan. In this passage, what we find is that devils must obey the command of Jesus. When Jesus spoke to this legion of devils, they must obey him. There is no debate. There is no, we'll think about it. There is not even the capability of refusing. Jesus speaks with authority and he sets free. Now you say, well, that's during Jesus' ministry. That's then in the Gospels. Jesus has the same authority today. His authority is still present. He still sets men free. This man, according to verse 35, experienced a complete transformation and restoration to wholeness. He didn't become perfect overnight, but there was obviously a change that took place in his life. Anyone could see it. Anyone could look at this man objectively and say, something happened to him. Amen. I don't know if any of you can look back in your life at the time when you got saved, and then the response of people who knew you, maybe unsaved family and friends. And some of them perhaps expressed some disbelief. What happened to you? You used to be so fun. You used to do all this stuff with us, and you're not interested in that. And you used to go and, I don't know, what happened to you? You got weird all of a sudden. What they don't understand is that your life has been set free from bondage by the power of Jesus Christ. Jesus has power to set people free. The ultimate expression of the change in this man is seen in verse 38. Now the man out of whom the devils were departed besought him that he might be with him. Amen. What was the one desire that this man had? I want to be with Jesus. I want to walk with Jesus. I want to fellowship with Jesus. I want to be near Jesus. I want to be a part of what Jesus is doing. His transformation was not expressed solely by a change of wardrobe and a change of behavior and a change of his outward countenance. It was expressed by his desire to be with Jesus. And I'm telling you, if you're with Jesus, a lot of things are going to change. But it is possible for people to go through a process of trying to reform and change the outside without a real desire to be with Jesus. That's not conversion. That's reformation. We don't need reformation. We need regeneration. We need to be transformed by the power of God. This man's heart had changed. He changed on the inside, and that brought about changes on the outside. But the most notable thing is not the outside change. The most notable thing is the inside change. Now, I ask you this morning, what is the evidence on the inside that your life has changed? Where is your desire for God? Where is your desire to fellowship with Him? Where is your yearning to walk with God? Listen, many professing Christians have a strong longing for the world. Yes. A strong longing to act like, look like, behave like, be with the world. That is not an evidence of a new creature. A new creature wants to be with Him. Now you notice that Jesus didn't humor his request. In verse 38, Jesus sent him away. And it wasn't that Jesus didn't want him to be near or to fellowship with him. It was that Jesus had a purpose for him. And he said in verse 39, return to thine own house and show how great things God hath done unto thee. Amen. And he went his way, and he published throughout the whole city how great things Jesus had done unto him. Why would Jesus tell him to do this? Because there is an entire city of people who need their lives changed. And here's an ambassador, a messenger, someone that they knew, someone that they saw his experience, and now they saw the change in his life, and he had a unique opportunity to go back to those people and say, the reason I'm different is because of Jesus. It's because of what God has done in my life. The longing of a true child of God is to be in the presence of the Lord. It's to be with the Lord. The longing of a child of God is to be delivered from this evil world and all that is pertaining to this evil world. But the reality is that God has placed us here to go and tell other people the great things that God has done for us. Would that we would live that way. But the text clearly wants us to understand that Jesus has authority over devils. Now, this morning, addressing a congregation of this size, there is not a doubt in my mind that there are people in the congregation this morning who in one area or a few areas or a lot of areas realize that they are under the control of this world and of the enemy. You may even be here this morning saying, I long to be set free. I haven't been able to find the answer. I'm telling you this morning, Jesus has the power and He has the authority to deliver you. You say, what do I need to do? Well, the first step is you need to yield to the authority of Jesus in your life. You need to allow Jesus to have His will and your way and His way in your life. His will, His way in your life so that you can see his authority being exerted over these powers that do exist. Many times when we are caught up in difficulties, problems, this life is full of problems, isn't it? Yeah. All kinds of problems. We have problems in relationships with other people. We have these sins that we struggle against, besetting sins, the scripture refers to them as in the book of Hebrews. We have these circumstances that we face. We have all these sorts of things. And sometimes we ask ourselves the question, what is going on? And God reminds us, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. Some of you parents need to hear this and take it to heart. You're not wrestling against your child who is trying to exert their will. You are wrestling against a spiritual power that is at work behind that, trying to steal, kill, and destroy. Therefore, the methods of the flesh, the manipulation tactics which you think are going to deliver that situation will not work. You're going to have to wrestle with the weapons of our warfare, which are not carnal, but mighty to the pulling down of strongholds. You're going to have to get serious about spiritual warfare and putting on the armor of God. Now, Jesus didn't have to put on the armor of God. He always had the armor of God. But you and I, we have to make a choice to put on the armor of God. We have to make a choice not to fight the flesh with the flesh. We need to be filled with the Spirit of God. We need to bring the power of God into the situations of life, realizing that the only solution is the spiritual solution which God has given. And Jesus can deliver. That's why we say prayer is not the least that you can do. Prayer is spiritual warfare for the soul of another person. Prayer is employing the help of God in a situation that needs God's touch. That's why we say a Bible answer isn't a Sunday school answer. A Bible answer is God's wisdom applied to the realities of life. We don't dismiss that casually as, oh, well, it's nice to hear about that when you're 3 years old in Sunday school. No, that's God's truth, and God's truth changes people's lives. The gospel is the power of God unto salvation. May we believe this morning that God has the ability to deliver people from sin. God has the ability to break the chains of sin. God has the ability to draw men into a place of close, intimate fellowship and usefulness for his kingdom during their time on this earth. To put it simply, Jesus is better. Jesus is stronger. Jesus is greater than anything that Satan and this world can offer. Amen. So what you should do is worship Jesus because he has the authority. This morning, Jesus can help you. Every head is bowed, every eye is closed. No one's looking around. Perhaps God has spoken to your heart this morning. Perhaps you need to cry out to him and ask him for his help. Perhaps you need to approach his throne with humility and confess that you're powerless to change yourself, but you want him to work to change you. Perhaps this morning you need to simply, quietly put your faith in the gospel message that Jesus died, was buried, and rose again for your sins, fulfilling the scriptures. I don't know what God is doing in your life today, but I hope for just a moment you'll talk to him, and then I'll close in prayer.